What's up, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion, The Writer's Room in Color, a conversation with BIPOC writers. My name is Raquel Harris, and I'm super excited to moderate this conversation about the experiences of BIPOC TV writers and the issues impacting them in the writer's room. We have a stellar group here, including Lucas Brown Eyes, who joined the WGA in 2014, Lauren Goodman, who joined the WGA in 2016, Allison Lee, who joined the WGA in 2019, Joel Boyd, who joined the WGA in 2018, and Nasser Samara, who joined the WGA in 2021. Thanks everyone so much for being a part of this convo. So my first question is, I really want to kick this off with an overview of the experience. Since the 2023 WGA strike began, which was on May 2nd, has the strike shifted or moved any conversations forward related to racial equity or inclusion in terms of BIPOC TV writers? And I'll kick that off with Lucas.
As far as moving it forward, I don't know. I feel like it's very, solidarity and unity, and that's all great. But a few people, which is great, are talking about how mini rooms are affecting the lower levels, and specifically how that affects marginalized communities who are just now getting in. I know with Native Americans, we got like our first TV show in 2020, and then it seems like they decided 2 months after that to stop paying everyone, stop hiring staff writers, stop doing this, stop doing all these things that affect those who may have just gotten jobs. I remember when I first started, you would count on one hand all the Native writers, and it's not that far different. Now we have two hands. You could count on Native writers who are staffed. But a couple of TV shows go away and we lose all of that. And I feel like the way the current industry is going, and this is specifically what the strike is bringing up, is the lack of access for lower level writers and how that affects them. And I think that is amplified for writers of color and marginalized writers.
Absolutely. And you would say that there's not really been any conversations. I mean, have you had any conversations with other people of color in terms of, the different things that BIPOC TV writers are wanting during this time?
Yeah, yes. People are talking about it. I feel, and it's affecting everyone. It's just, it's harder on those who are more vulnerable. And I feel like what the union wants and what everyone wants will be a net benefit for writers of color and will help us. And people are talking about it.
Absolutely. And Joel?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lucas. I feel like definitely between us, it's being talked about, but it's always been talked about with us. You know what I mean? Like, we always have to talk about it. I do think, it's just become more apparent. I think, especially I was talking to somebody at one of the strikes, and we brought to attention the percentage of people who are on the line, right? Just looking around and just being like, oh, who's here though? And one of the aspects of the conversation was like, wow, when you really look at who's at the strikes, and just who is, present for a lot of these things, it's like people that are at the strikes can afford to strike in a weird way. Like, I know people that are like, I'm at work right now. You know what I mean? Like, I had to go pick up this job, or, oh, I can't be there every day, or, oh, I want to join you guys. So there's that weird aspect too, just the cost of living in LA, which, affects everybody. But I think there's a clear difference when it's like, oh, some people can literally afford to be here and some people can't. So I think that's part of it.
So what I'm going to do next is I want everyone to raise their hand if they've experienced this personally or if it's something that they've witnessed. So if you have ever been the only person of color in a writer's room, please raise your hand. For those who have experienced it, I see that a few of you have. Describe what that was like, what that experience was like, and did it change over time since you've been in the WGA? Lauren, I'll pitch that to you.
For me, I mean, it was kind of like my growing up. I went to a predominantly white high school, and I had a professor apologize to me when he had to talk about slavery, which is embarrassing when you're taking AP history. And so, in a writer's room, a lot of times there's the notion that Black folks are monolithic. I mean, that we're not monolithic, rather, and that we all speak with the same voice. And so whenever there's a character that's marginalized, you all of a sudden become the encyclopedic reference for that. And there's a way in which it's not intentional, I don't think necessarily, but you tend to be ghettoized because you are that either diversity writer or a writer who comes through a program, and you're always having to live in this space of being a desensitizer, which sometimes gets exhausting because you're there to tell stories, you're there to mine your experiences. And what I find is a lot of times, you have to run the risk of wondering about being perceived as someone who is, as a person particularly as a Black woman, are you aggressive? Are you combative? Are you talking about things? And so there's always this burden. It's the Du Bois thing of double consciousness that doesn't go away in the writer's room. And I think that that's just indicative of the experience of people of color that move in spaces where we are often not the majority, right? And that's something that you learn over time. I mean, it was my experience in film school. It's been my experience in the writer's room. But it's also sort of given me an edge that I think that I can use to my benefit. Not to say that that's a great thing, but it's a necessary thing, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And
yeah,
others who have had that same experience. And I want to know, how comfortable were you? Was there any discomfort? Obviously, of course, when there's microaggressions and people being passively aggressive in terms of how comfortable were you? Did you feel like you had space and opportunity to speak your mind? Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, like I said, I was a staff writer, and as you get into the room, you gain more confidence. So there's all the pressure as a staff writer anyway. For me, it's the notion of having to navigate a new environment, and then, the hierarchy in a writer's room. That does get compounded when you happen to be the only person of color in that room. And that's a space that's not unusual to me, but it's a different kind of way that you navigate the world. And as a writer, you're there to mine stories. And so a lot of times your stories, if you're the only person of color, they're not necessarily the stories that everyone else in the room has experienced. And so in a lot of ways, you're having to educate people to desensitize them to ways of looking at the world that they might take for granted. And that's okay, because I'm a storyteller. That's what I'm supposed to do. But it is that sort of double consciousness that Du Bois talks about that has not abated in 100 plus years. It still exists for people of color.
Absolutely. For Lucas, who has been in the WGA a little bit, earlier on, were you the only person in a writer's room at one point? And when did you start to see that change? And do you guys think that it was a matter of the types of shows that you were on? Like, for instance, with you, Lauren, you were on Snowfall. So I would imagine that the writer's room would be, plentiful of BIPOC writers. But does that make a difference in terms of, being able to see representation like that? Just referencing that, I would imagine that that's an example of a show that I would think has a lot of people of color in the writer's room. But yes,
there were.
Okay, absolutely. And then for Lucas, did you see that shift? Because he was in the WGA in 2014 when he first entered. Did you see that start to change? Was there more people taking up space in the writer's room that looked like you?
Yeah. So when I first started, I actually, I came out of college and I had no idea how to become a TV writer. I did production, why? Well, I had my reasons. But I came out, I'm like, I want to be a TV writer. Oh, no, I don't know how to do that. So I was like, well, how did all the other native TV writers do it? And I found two. And I looked them up and I found out that they went through this thing called the ABC writing program. So that's that's kind of how I entered. So I definitely came in during a time when there weren't many native writers like myself. And the odd thing is I've developed projects and I've done a lot of things where I was the only, native in the room, only writer of color in the room. And then oddly enough, staffing, I've gotten pretty lucky. And I know that this is a me thing because every room I've been in has been, not monochromatic. So every staffing room I've been in has had, someone else, never a Native American. I've freelanced for a Native American animated show, but I've never actually staffed on a show with another Native American one day. But Yeah, so I've been pretty lucky. Like every room I've been in has been 50% male, female. Plenty of diversity in all the rooms I've been in, and I'm seeing that get even better. Because I feel like a lot of times it's you get like a great gender ratio, but then it's there's maybe 2 writers of color. There's me and someone who's maybe Asian or Latinx. And now I feel like it's much more diverse, and you're feeling it. So I feel like it's growing. But with that, I've always been kind of lucky in the sense that every room I've been in, staffing wise, not freelancing or development, but staffing wise, has been pretty diverse. I will say on the development side, and this is the side where I often find myself sometimes only person there who's not a white male. It's a little weird. And that's the part that I'm hoping that we change, and we grow forward on that, because I feel like there hasn't been a lot of change for me. Again, I'm only speaking for me because I've had an amazing development experience, or staffing experience. So I'm hoping it gets better, but I haven't seen much on that side of it. But.
Yeah, can I just sorry.
Next, Allison, yeah.
Oh no, I just really wanted to add to that. I worked on the development side prior to being a writer, and that Mo Ryan article just recently came out about Lost, and when I read that, I just felt total affinity to the Korean writer and her being called Korean or geisha. And certainly on the development side, ostensibly you're going to find yourself being the lone person of color in a room, possibly of white guys. And I experienced that myself on that side. I heard one colleague of mine referred to his Asian American girlfriend as his concubine. And certainly, we're dealing with microaggressions, but the layers of full-on aggression are still there. I just because things are getting better, I don't think that we can, absolve people of their past sins and offenses. We're certainly dealing with so many different layers of the odds being stacked against us. And I really want to call attention to it. It's still there. Just because, there's 1 or 2 of us in a room doesn't correct the whole issue or right the ship.
Mm-hmm. That brings me to my next question. Raise your hand. How many of you have ever witnessed or experienced the stereotyping of a POC character or POC stories in the writer's room? So most of you. Okay, Nasser, you had a visceral reaction. What were some of the things that you experienced?
I mean,
where to start?
And just so you guys know, the people that are watching, just to make it be very clear, it's not something that we find funny. It's just that unfortunately, these are realistic things that happen to people of color every single day. And so
sort of gallows laughter. It's gallows laughter is what it is.
And so
yeah, I mean, we laugh because if we don't, we cry. And
Yeah.
I mean, when you have to defend a character, a young boy who is growing up, and an executive asks you where the dirt road is, and you say, well, he doesn't live in the country, he lives in DC. These are the kinds of things that you have to justify in characters when you have to explain to a person that it's not unrealistic for a kid in the inner city to ride a horse, to know how to ride a horse. I mean, these kinds of things that, some characters who are not marginalized, who are not people of color, take for granted, that you have to justify this actually can happen. This is a reality, right? Not every Black story is a crime story or a drug story or an abuse story. And so there's always this fight with the narrative to tell a wide range of stories that other writers get to do. And so that's a frustration for sure.
Absolutely. Nasser?
Well, I mean, I think also part of my reaction and everyone else's is because we know not only our stories, but so many other stories of other colleagues and what they've experienced. And, I think I've been fortunate to have worked in largely positive rooms, but that doesn't mean that, even when we're creating something, that something does come out, something does get said, and it's not even from necessarily people who are running the room. It can be your colleagues, it can be people who you viewed as friends. It can be so many different instances. It can kind of be like a landmine for us, you know what I mean? Because it's just constantly navigating what we should say, what we shouldn't say. And then when something does get said that doesn't necessarily sit well with you, then it continues to go on being like, well, what am I allowed to say and what am I not going to say? Is this going to hurt me in the eyes of this writer? Is this going to hurt my career, et cetera, et cetera? To say that any workspace that we deal with is entirely safe would be, I mean, we'd be kidding ourselves. You know what I mean? So I think that's the thing that I think maybe doesn't get said enough is I would probably say 99% of writers of color don't get to entirely be themselves in a row because we are constantly thinking about, will this affect my career? Will this affect my community? It's psychological warfare. What we deal with. Even on a good day when we're just showing up. That's the reality of what it's like to be us in a room.
I wanted to say too, like when you talk about a safe workspace, there's this, I guess I want to call it a myth, but I don't know if it's true. I've heard that like comedy writers' rooms are technically not allowed to sue for like sexual harassment or discrimination because of the safety of the fact that it's a comedy writer's room and we're supposed to be towing the line, constantly. Which we, as I would say, comedy writers, in my experience, we kind of lean into that and treat it as like a sarcastic thing. And I've had experience where we lean into it on a day and just say all the offensive things that we can possibly think of. And then we kind of move on after that. It's like, okay, we got that out of the way. But I think even with that, it's like, I think when you look at the comedy space specifically, I think there's this kind of dichotomy that's happening and a lot of split worlds that are happening between comedy creators and comedy audiences, where I think most people are like, half the world is like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of this PC culture. But I think the other half of people are just like, write smarter jokes. You know what I mean? Write better jokes. We've heard these 80 stereotypes about these people for the last 50 some odd whatever years. Let's write better jokes. So I think that's also something we shouldn't be shy to challenge.
Absolutely. And how many of you have actually spoken out about it, and what was the response? Like when you heard a colleague, whether it be your boss, when you did speak out about it, what was the reaction?
I have to confess that I generally, not that I've experienced too many, but I probably haven't. I just try to survive. I try to be the cool girl and say, oh, that's, let that be water off my back. That has been my MO. I mean, certainly at the beginning of my career, but now perhaps I'm a little bit angrier and there's more rage in me, so I will be able to see something. But, in the beginning, it's constant code switching, and there are many different layers by which we have to code switch. First of all, we're trying to get projects about ourselves, somewhere out there. Secondly, we're negotiating microaggressions in the writer's room and yet trying to keep our voices on the page. And thirdly, there's only so much space for us. There's a quota for people of color in our projects. Like if someone like Daniel Day Kim is like, oh, they only want crazy rich Asians, then how am I supposed to get my project on board? So inevitably, speaking out takes a backseat for me because I'm out there trying to sell and set up. And unfortunately, it came at a cost. And hopefully I can publicly pronounce to everyone here that I'll have more of a voice in terms of fighting back and saying something.
No, and we want this again, like Will just said, say this hard to name them. But that's real. Like as people of color, survival is embedded in the texture of who we are. And no, there's no judgment. I just want to put that out.
So I will say there's a difference between lower level writers and upper level writers as far as safety goes and who can speak out and who will. I've done comedy, I've done drama, I've been lower level, I'm now upper level, and I have spoken out about it, but my strategy always tends and like a lot of times it falls on me. For many reasons. I ran joke. I've done comedy and drama now, 4 and 4 shows each, so pretty evenly split. But for kind of my longest run, I had a show that was a comedy. I went for 5 seasons, and then another one was double season. So I've done a lot of comedy, and I've ran the joke rooms, and especially in joke rooms, you know, it was kind of my job to filter and that. And instead of kind of saying like, hey, this is offensive, because you know, some people feel attacked when you point out the things that they do wrong, and that's maybe it's a maturity thing, but either way, what I always try to do is first I try to beat it, of like, let's do something better here, and then I'm like, oh, you know, this is kind of stereotypical, it's kind of cliche, you know, the silent native guy or the blah 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 or this or that. So I bring it up in a very casual way, and especially when I was beyond staff writer, this was easier to do. And there was a little bit more experience and relationship with the upper level, with the showrunners. And also, like, when you're just in the industry, you know, you might feel like you won't survive if you lose a job, if you won't do that. So I really feel for people just entering, and I feel like it is the job of the people who have been in the industry a little bit longer to protect them. So that's kind of how I always approached it. But I haven't ever had pushback so far. You know, we'll see. But I find that most people, especially when you kind of you know, be like, this is cliche, this is that, this is you know, a stereotype that we shouldn't do. They're like, okay, cool, and they try to move on. I think less than a few have been bothered by it, but you know, was never an issue. So yeah, that's kind of how I approach it. Just being, you know, I focus on the work to make it less personal, because I one, it's to protect myself, but it's also to you know, you got to live with these people. If you're a comedy writer, you got to live with these people a long time. And oddly enough, because the hours are longer, that's why I said that. But oddly enough, drama feels less.
It depends on the showrunner, though, right?
Yes, it does. But in general, I'm like, ooh, I love drama hours. But oddly enough, drama feels harder, because with comedy, it's like, oh, I've heard that. That's blah, 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 you know, whatever it is. And you can kind of play it off as you're talking about the joke, and not that this person said something incredibly racist. Whereas drama, because it's often a story point, it's harder to dig in there and get that out. But yes, that's essentially how I approached it.
Absolutely. And are there unique challenges, this is for Lauren and Allison, at the intersection of race and gender? You know, what unique challenges have you all faced? I know, Lauren, you kind of touched on it earlier, but, you know, as far as stereotyping goes in the writer's room, and does yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to come across that. There, you know, I've had female showrunners and male showrunners, and I think that the way that you sort of navigate that space is, well, there's one rule. If you're going to blow up a story, you got to have a solution to it, right? You don't just throw a grenade and hide your hands. And so that even comes to when you're dealing with characters. If you have a showrunner, a male showrunner, and you're saying, well, this feels like it could be a little bit misogynistic, or it's a little bit patriarchal, you've got to be able to sort of point to why you feel that way, and then hopefully provide a solution. And that's just sort of the necessary role of a writer in a room anyway. And for me, as a, you know, the thing that I've learned too is that pushback is you kind of have to toughen your skin. I mean, this business, you know, I've heard that phrase that politics ain't beanbag. This is the same. Being a TV writer is not beanbags. You got to toughen your skin and, you know, navigate the space so that when you're in a position to have your show, that you create the environment that you want. I think the hardest challenges, the hardest rooms for me have been the rooms where I've learned the most as a writer too. Doesn't mean that I go home and sort of maybe meditate and, you know, cry in my pillow, but I'm toughening my skin, because these stories, the ability to tell stories that matter, to show people that look like me in a different light, it's worth it, you know. And I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of so many of my ancestors anyway. So come at me, it's fine, you know.
Absolutely. But people should be aware. I will put that out there. Like, yes, yeah, absolutely. So my next question, raise your hand if you've ever had to repeat a writer position. Okay, so most. What was the role and how many times did you have to repeat it? I'm going to give that one to Nasser.
I had to repeat staff writer a second time. And I think also it's hard because coming from rooms where I've had largely very positive experiences, I had to walk away from a better deal because I wanted to work on another show. And I think it's hard because, you know, I wouldn't say I took a back seat, but in some ways I did because, you know, if I'm at one home that's offering me 1 bump, 2 bumps off of being a one-time staff writer to then going to a new home that's basically saying, we need you, we need your authentic voice, we need your authentic stories, except we are not going to honor the title that you're being given elsewhere, you know, it's hard because it's like you're trying to set up a new relationship. And this is how they're starting that relationship. Once again, largely positive experience at both shows, but it's a weird place where I'm supposed to feel grateful, but I also am supposed to then say I'm not worth what I should be. You know, it's I don't know how else to talk about it other than it makes it very complicated, you know.
Yeah.
And
that's absolutely true.
Speaking to most people, I mean, I know my story of having to repeat staff one time is actually probably the better story because I know people have had to repeat staff writer 3, 4, sometimes 5 times. And what are you going to say to that? I mean, the whole point of theoretically rising amongst levels is that you get to an experience where then you are being told now you can run a show because you've had that experience. If people of color are not rising up that totem pole, then when are they going to get the opportunity to show, run, and tell their story? So then if only, you know, people with skin pigment lighter than all of us are rising up that totem pole a lot faster, then they're going to get the opportunity to tell their story. And most, as writers, we want to tell stories that sometimes reflect our identities. So then we look at the television landscape and it's all white television shows. Now we understand why, because they're the only ones rising to the top, you know? So what are you going to do?
This was a huge, I feel like every single person that I talked to that was a person of color at the picket lines all mentioned the repeating positions over and over again, and how it cripples the opportunity that you have to develop your craft and also be paid more. And also, Nasser, when I spoke to you, you mentioned how it even messes up the opportunity for you to go on set because they're like, if you don't have enough experience, then I can't trust you to go, you know, to these different locations.
I mean, thankfully, I've worked in rooms where I was given the opportunity to go to set. I was able to produce my episodes. I worked with very generous showrunners who, specifically Ali Shout and Seeks of iCarly, who, you know, I was in post-production. Like I'm, as an executive story editor, far more ahead than most. But that's a rare bird that I am floating because there's been tons of people, even co-producers, who are not getting the opportunities to be able to go to set. And then once again, like you said, how are you going to then run a successful show? How then are you going to be competitive amongst your peers when you don't have those opportunities given to you?
I just to speak from another perspective, I repeated writer's assistant twice. which isn't bad. But the funny thing is, in between repeating those two job titles, I was already in the guild. So it was like a weird just thing that happened. But the first experience, just to give people kind of an idea of what I was dealing with, like my first job, I was a writer's assistant. I'm not even going to say what the show was, because it was just like the showrunner's a madman and I don't want to give him any more publicity. He doesn't need any more Twitter followers. But there was me and there was one other young guy who were both the writer's assistants to this comedy writer's room. Myself and another young white guy. And we were both, out of the Chicago comedy scene, super funny, nerdy dudes keeping the room together. On the next season, he got the bump and I didn't yet. And it was just really weird little things would happen. Like for this, 4 months or whatever that we were working on that first season, he would just be treated like a son. Like he was just literally like arm around this guy. It was like the showrunner was like his uncle, and they weren't related at all. I'm just saying that that's what their relationship was like. And meanwhile, I was being asked to do things like fill this guy's fridge with pressed juices. Like it was just weird little stuff like that, where it's just like literally he would walk into the room and like say, "Hey, so-and-so, can you come with me today? I need you to help me with this. Hey, Joel, can you go to my car and grab this stuff?" And it was just like a complete 180 of how he was treating us. So yeah, it's just like little stuff like that. And I think I would just say too, I hear everybody in the fact that, I want to say to anybody who's watching this too, that's aspiring to be a writer, if you are a writer of color, I think it also, I'm not, of course, like Allison said, I don't want to absolve any of the venom that is still present and a lot of these higher ups. But at the same time, what can we do? It's like, I think I learned my own power in terms of how I approach my spirit and like the way I carry myself when I'm at the job, right? So if I come in and I'm already thinking of myself as a producer in a couple of years, or I'm already thinking of myself in that way and leaning into that, people around me treat me that way. You know what I mean? I think it's also like we as people of color have to put on a mindset every day that I am not what they treat me as, right? I'm going to step into this space and be who I know I'm going to be in 5 years or whatever. So unfortunately, we have to kind of do that.
Yeah, I agree with Joel. There's a level of excellence that we have to present, whereas other people might not get, they get more leeway on top of that. And, it's unfair, but at the same time, all those rejections and, being fired or whatever it is, that just gives you the grit and you win by attrition as a person of color, practically. Can you hang in there and beat out the rest and be excellent at the same time? I think that's always probably required of everyone here. And that's by the manner by which we function.
It's your no, it's not. But that really is sort of like the salient point that Allison is making, is that how you learn to find your inner strength in systems that really essentially weren't designed for you to be there in the first place, right? And so that's okay though, because you're telling the story that you have. No one else has that story, and there's a value to that. And when you understand that, that really is your seat of power, because what's undeniable is what you put on the page at the end of the day. And that's true. I think it's knowing your own agency to a certain extent, and why you're in that seat, in that room. There's a voice that you have that you can cultivate that is uniquely your own. And that's where your power resides, really.
I was just going to piggyback on that a little bit. There was that super funny, I don't know who she is, amazing writer, but she wrote a strike sign that said, well, Chat GPT doesn't have my childhood trauma. We're all talking about AI. And I was like, well, you really don't have the trauma of people of color. So yeah, go ahead and adopt those systems or whatever. But sorry, Lucas.
No, I will say it is a system, and it is designed to push people down, because Oftentimes it's not about the money. You think it would be, but it's not. It's about level. And I've gotten in so many contract negotiations about level. I've repeated level 4 times, and it's gotten to the point where it's getting ridiculous. And they use that level. Like, they don't care if you've done 10 seasons of television. They'll use that level to pin you with a coincidentally white showrunner who is co-EP, EP, whatever it is, whatever level it is. And at this point, it's to the point where I'm being paired with people with 4 years less experience than me, like almost half, because I had to repeat level and they didn't. I've known people who immediately go from story editor to co-EP. It's rare, but I've seen that happen. And it's like, oh, okay, well now, like, how did you do that? I don't know anyone in my situation who could have done that, because that's the fight. And it, at least in my situation, like for me, it feels like it's done on purpose, because it's becoming transparent. And I do believe that one of the things, and it's not a main talking point, and I don't even know if anyone's fighting for it, but to stop repeating levels would really help any marginalized writer, because it directly affects development. And that's the very unfortunate thing, because you can have a room filled with all upper level and or all lower, and the showrunner, they have their second in command, they have their hierarchy, and it sometimes doesn't even go by level. They just have that. But with development, it seems like they choose to do that, and the industry usually chooses to pair, oddly enough, marginalized writers with white writers. And it's at the point where I've now reached it where I'm like, well, it's not about experience anymore. So what's going on?
Absolutely. That's a good question.
Moving on to another really heavy topic within the WGA is the mini rooms. For a lot of people, or for people who are watching who do not know what mini rooms are, they're very small niche, consisting of 2 to 3 writers, sometimes a showrunner. The writers that are brought on, sometimes they're brought on to develop or write a show that may or may not be greenlit. They may not be brought on for a production, and they're paid however much that set pay is. And then the writers afterwards are kind of like, okay, well, what's next? I was going to say, make sure I get that correctly. How many of you guys have been in a mini room before? Okay, Allison and Lauren and Lucas. What experience like? Is it what everyone is saying it is like? In terms, and how does being in a mini room, or how does the mini room model impact BIPOC TV writers specifically?
I mean, it's a way to exact maximum labor for a minimum price. I mean, I think that's really the most sort of basic explanation. And, for a lower when I got into the mini room, I was asked to repeat as a staff writer in that mini room. So that's my repeat staff writer experience. And the reason for it was because I was on a show that was a summer series, and it was only 13 episodes as opposed to 22. Meanwhile, I discovered that the person who came in as a co-EP was in a mini room on a show that was never even greenlit. So the disparity was obvious. And I think that the thing is mini rooms are sort of a product of, I feel like, the tech companies who really just want to maximize as many as a product. So basically the idea is you get a bunch of writers, a lean crew, they're going to write all the scripts, and then that showrunner is going to be responsible for seeing all those scripts produced, as opposed to in a normal process where the writer of that episode would get a chance to produce their episode and learn the craft. It's all a way to cut price and to really devalue the human resource of a writer. And so I just think that mini rooms are so detrimental, not only to a showrunner who also, or an upper level writer who is going to get paid the same as a lower level writer, but in terms of the longevity of the industry and bringing writers along so that they can understand the craft and learn, it goes completely against that concept. So don't think it's a great idea.
Yeah, my experience in TV is a little bit different because I was brought in to create or rewrite pilots specifically. And my perception of mini room prior to the strike, there were a lot of writers of color who are concerned because, frankly speaking, as Lauren said, this was the way by which streamers told us, oh, we want your stories. Oh, we're going to put your stories on screen. And yet they were, cutting costs and not giving us the same resources as, mainstream showrunners. So my perception of the mini room is that, it's a lot of talk, right? It's a lot of saying, we want your stories. We want to, put you out there. But at the same time, the resources you're given aren't, like a full writer staff. Like I look at Succession and how many writers were on that, and who here wouldn't want to write something like that with the full resources behind us? It feels like it's a little bit of the streamers doing lip service. Certainly there is a big demand for writers of colors and our stories, but did they follow through? And the mini room is a clear example of the lack, right? We aren't given the same launch pad as a mainstream writer, I would say.
One thing that really stood out to me in my interviewing process was a writer flat out told me that a TV executive, not all, but a lot of TV executives will not hire a person of color on a show if the show does not include a POC character or have or a person that matches that person's. Yeah. Have you guys ever heard this? And just what does that make you feel like as a person of color in this industry? Who's all heard that before? If not, then that's...
I mean, no, I've heard it. Hasn't happened to me personally, but I have heard that from another writer, and I'm not. I mean, the fact that I'm not surprised is really sad because, I mean, the notion that because here's the thing. Conversely, you will have white showrunners on a show that's about African Americans in selling crack in their neighborhood in 1980. And no one is going to question that white showrunner's experience about, a guy who decides that he wants to be, the Carnegie Mellon of crack. So can I tell a story about, Anne Frank and make that a drama? That's the question. And is there parity in the ability of me to tell that story versus, another person who happens to be of, Jewish ancestry? Those kinds of things are so reductive. They're pejorative, and it says that I'm limited in my scope as a writer simply because of who I happen to be. Completely, and it's only one-sided. It's a one-sided question, So a little enraging but yes, I've heard that happen.
Yeah, I haven't heard those exact words, but I do know when I was on the development side, I just felt sorry for the diversity hire because there was no respect for that person. And I could see a TV executive saying that, it was just like someone, that person was someone you just had to hire to pay their salary for or whatever it was. But yeah, I can certainly see that kind of attitude being pervasive throughout the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lauren, go right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just also wanted to say, I think it's really funny. Like I know I'm leaning into what's funny about this for me as a comedy person, but I'm just like, how do you not think like that we could do that? Like we always have to watch their stories. We've grown up watching Friends because you made us. Like, how do you not think we could turn around and write yours, and then you're gonna sit there and tell us you're gonna write ours? Like, that is so weird to me. It's like it's wild.
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes into, like you just said, Joel, understanding POC stories, understanding people of color in general. Where are we right now? I feel like, seriously, I think that as a journalist, I'm constantly updated on what's going on in the world, what's going on around me, which is why this was one of the things that I really wanted to talk about and bring people together to talk about. Hollywood has for a long time made plans and promises, especially during the during the pandemic and after George Floyd was murdered. Hollywood came forth, a lot of businesses came forth with a lot of promises, specifically towards DEI and furthering DEI. Where are we with those promises? Yeah, I know it's a lot. It's a lot. Do you believe it? Do you still have faith in Hollywood that it actually cares about the stories that are related to you? Nasser?
You know,
He couldn't hold that side back. He was like,
I mean, I mean, I think the thing that makes me laugh is it's like we all know what the solution is, and yet it still seems like it's like so difficult for that solution to just be enacted. Like I don't I, I don't think there are just enough people of color making any decisions. And the problem with that is the faces that you're talking to right now, we've made it in our careers, but it comes with the acknowledgement that like I had to be palatable to white people at some point to get this job, to get this opportunity, to get ahead. Like we all had to pass the white bar of like who was hiring, who understood your writing, you know what I mean? That's it. It's
Yeah.
And I mean, there's just been so many voices in, I think, the industry who, you know, I think the acknowledgement of just the power structures being so white means that we're not going to get serious change if we're still trying to have them be the people that make these solutions. And that's the reality. So there's been steps, there's been strides of trying to make things better, and I think you know, we're at a slow pace because once again, the people who are sort of making these decisions and trying to make these solutions doesn't come easy to them because they're not the ones experiencing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and just to Nasser's point real quickly, it comes with also, you know, people like what they know, right? It's like if I'm convivial with you, if I know your story, then maybe there's there's a similarity that I can understand, right? There's something that I can glom onto that I can connect to. And part of it is also is that you have executives that maybe don't know that life experience. And so if you have a wider range of people who are in the position of evaluating material that understand it, right? That, you know, like for instance, Tara Duncan at Onyx, if you look at what they're doing, you have a woman of color in there who has a perspective that's not maybe the perspective that's been the last 20 or 30 years. And so as a result, you might see a show like, you know, you might see Kerry Washington and Delroy Lindo in a dramedy, half-hour dramedy. You know, that's because of people understanding the value of that story. Not, you know, and so it really is having executives that have that match an experience that isn't just one voice, that is really indicative of the culture in which we live in. And, you know, it's to me what was sad is Warner Brothers ending their DEI program, their writers, the Warner Brothers Writers Workshop. So where are these marginalized voices going to come from if these kinds of programs go away? I mean, I got my start through CBS, their writing program in Humanitas. That helped me even after I went to film school. So these things are necessary. And if we're saying that we want real voices that reflect who we are, then we have to actually put, you know, meat on the bones. The rubber's got to hit the road.
And just to add to that too, like real quick, I mean, I'm Palestinian, I'm Mexican, and I'm queer. And oftentimes it's the queer part of my identity that gets me through the door because there's executives that understand that story. So if I write a pilot about an Arab American family, that might not necessarily be the thing that executive is interested in because they don't know. There's not a lot of you know what I mean? Where are the Arab American voices on screen? I don't understand this story. I don't understand this cultural aspect. It's why Lucas was saying, I mean, 2020 until we get a freaking Native American show on the air. I mean, that's the reality is, like Lauren's saying, we don't have executives or people understanding our stories. So then they don't get made. And this is why I think there's a lack of serious change, despite however many events have happened in this, you know, busted ass country in the last right here.
No, absolutely.
I wanted to say really quick too, like before we move on. I think they want a hit is really what it is. Like everybody, we've been talking, circling around the money, right? All these executives, they want a big hit show, they want a big hit movie. And I think what's funny about it is like when you get one, it was because somewhere along the line, whoever is up there in these executive seats, they took a risk on something that the world was kind of already ready to see, right? Like there was fertile ground, I think, for a show like Insecure. Like people were waiting for that show. There was already fertile ground for like a Rami, or you know what I'm saying? Like things that even I would say, people of, less melanin than us were like, honestly, they're watching those shows too, because they were ready for it too. They wanted so I think there's so many more of these pockets that they just aren't taking the risks. And like Allison said, giving the marketing budget, because there are also shows that are checking these boxes where it's like, man, there should be a billboard on Sunset, or like there should be there's some things where I'm just like simple little marketing things where I'm just like, some of it is being made, but they don't give us the budget enough to make it go crazy. You know what I mean? So then it exists for one season or 3 episodes or whatever. So it's like, it's weird, but people are really ready for it. It's just they're not doing it.
100% to all of that. It's all about risk and who gets that, like who gets the risk, who, gets to get their pilot remade after a $30 million pilot, that always happens to the same type of white dude. Let's be honest. But I've been waiting for the risk. And then when projects do well, I do notice that there's still less of a, everyone says that executives just want to follow the hit and make the same thing over and over. Yet Prey was the biggest premiere ever on Hulu. Where's Amber Midthunder's deal? Like, where are these deals when there's these huge blockbusters? Dances with Wolves, not saying it was the best movie for representation, but it was a huge hit. Where were those? Avatar. Where are all these follow-ups? You do one car movie does well, and all of a sudden they greenlight Hot Wheels. Where is that where is that for every other person?
Yeah, no, it's really a much bigger conversation than what we can even have here. And I agree with you completely, Nasser. I feel like it's the ongoing conversation that we keep having, but it's like we all know the solution. Really quick, because we are out of time, but I just want you guys all to go around really quickly and give a word of advice to the next generation that's coming up, because I like to end things on a positive note. And while all these things are very heavy, there's always light at the end of the hallway. So if you will start, Joel.
Sure. I would say, this is old news, I think, to a lot of people that already work in Hollywood. But if you don't work in Hollywood and you're coming up after us, I would say one of the most valuable things I learned, and this is also from, shout out Issa Rae, just network across instead of networking up. I think it obviously makes sense to try to impress and move up the totem pole and look towards the people who are handing out the jobs. But it's also really important to like box out and be like, okay, look who's next to you, and make things with them and really foster those relationships, the people that are next to you, because those people are also going to be rising with you. You can make amazing things together. So do that.
I will. Well, first of all, I want to promise that I'll get in the fights for you so that you don't have to. I don't want to put extra pressure on an emerging writer, but truly being excellent makes you bulletproof. So, always send those thank you emails, always, double check your whatever it takes, just be excellent. That's what makes you bulletproof. And despite all this, despite what we may have all said here collectively, this is always worth it. There's nothing else I would rather do. So just remember that joy, and let that keep you buoyant and safe. Yeah.
I think following your dreams is always rewarding you know, if you can, like Allison said, honestly, stay excellent. I think it's a matter of working 4 times as hard to get half of what other people get is probably the song we're all singing. And I think the only way to get that is, like Allison said, it's about being excellent. It's about, you know, doing everything you can to, I mean, it's just our reality is that, you know, this is how hard we have to work to get ahead. And at the end of the day, it just means we can go to bed knowing we're the shit.
Yeah. So, you know, what they say is when the powers that be want you dead, survival is resistance, it's protest. So survive, do whatever you can to do that. And I think some of that is, you know, rolling with the punches, and some of that is taking care of yourself. And I think a large part of it is the part that maybe we don't want to focus on is learning to love writing. If you don't, you know, I think we all love writing, but like really love it, really focus on it, because that's what you can control, because this industry, there's so much of it that you can't control. And so I would say focus on what you can, take care of yourself, and really, really hone your craft and get really good at it, in the sense, not, you know, to prove to others, but because the more you love what you can do, the more you will be happy. So that's kind of, you know, survive. Just being in the room is an act of resistance and protest. So keep doing it.
Two things really. Glenn Mazzara, who's a great writer, said, know your story. So every time that you meet someone, it's an opportunity to tell your story. You're a writer, so you should be able to tell it in a way that's provocative. Hopefully that extends the conversation. And then the other thing, another mentor, I've been really fortunate to have some amazing mentors in my life. Janine Sherman Berrois, a fantastic writer, said, don't get out of line, stay in line. And what that means to me is all the things that everyone has said. Work on your craft, you know, network across your platform, write every day, and don't get out of line. Don't get out of line, because everybody comes to this town maybe having the same dream that you have. And, you know, it is a war of attrition, right? So you stay in line, you work on your craft, and when you are in that room, tell your story, because that's where your power resides, in your story.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lucas, Allison, Laura, Nasser, and Joel, and also to everyone who tuned in to the Writers' Room in Color, a conversation with BIPOC writers. You can stay up to date on all news regarding the strike on TheWrap.com. We also encourage you to check out our Wrap Pro membership hub, which is focused on serving professionals in the entertainment space. And please be sure to save the date for October 4th for this year's Grill Wrap Pro's annual conference focused on the convergence of entertainment, media, and technology. And there will be more details on that very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you later.